Hey, everybody, it's Lauren Delisa Coleman here with you, bringing you another edition of the Inside series for film.io. We are still doing a bunch of interviews during DOC NYC, and I am really happy to be able to present this next filmmaker to you. Her name is Jamie Boyle. Jamie, what's up? Thanks for joining us. She is the filmmaker behind Anonymous Sister, and it is such a timely topic for a lot of bad and sad reasons, but it is quite timely right now, and I know that you guys are going to be really interested in hearing about this. Jamie, thanks so much for joining us here at the Inside series.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
She's so fab that, we had to kind of reschedule a couple of times. So I'm happy to have her now. But we are talking to if I am correct, a two-time Emmy award-winning director, right? So she's no joke, and that's why she's so busy. But let's talk about this particular film right now, Anonymous Sister. Jamie, can you start by giving us a synopsis of the film, please?
Sure. So about 13 years ago now, my mom and sister both became addicted to the prescription opioids that they were receiving from their doctors, for starting with acute short-term pain that quickly turned into long-term chronic pain. And I actually started filming them while I was still in film school. So I hadn't started a career in documentary yet, but I knew that I was watching something important and terrifying, but I wasn't quite sure what it was yet. There was not a lot of at least in Colorado and in my, 20-year-old world, there was not a lot. I had never heard the term opioid epidemic. It would be years till I heard that. I didn't understand that there was a problem. I don't think a lot of people did.
I'm sorry, what year was this that you started filming?
Yeah, so I started filming in 2008,
okay,
and then into 2009. Yeah,
okay.
So it was
go on.
The rhetoric was starting in the Rust Belt and around Appalachia and certain parts of the country, but it really hadn't made its way into the other regions. So anyway, after that, they both, and I'm not giving away anything, this is at the beginning of the film, but they both went into recovery and are still alive and well and in the minority in that regard. And about 4 years ago, I was almost 10 years into a career in documentary filmmaking now, and the epidemic was getting worse and worse, and they were seeing new hurdles all the time in their sobriety. And so I decided to start filming again and use our story to try and tell the bigger story about what was happening in millions of homes across the country. So I picked that footage back up that I had filmed as a very young adult and wove that in to both our entire upbringing and also since then, and also tried to intercut it with the larger national crisis that was happening simultaneously for the past 20 plus years.
Just a little feat like that, right? I mean, that is just it's really amazing. It's so remarkable, I think, that it speaks to your ability to see kind of something in advance, right? A trend, albeit not, obviously one that one thinks of as a good one, but you could see this back in 2008, which honestly, until you said this just now, and I saw the film, I didn't realize even myself that it had gone back that far, or even maybe before, then. Tell me how your mom and sister kind of felt about being filmed initially. I mean, did you have to kind of convince them? Were they happy to have this outlet? Because I'm sure they kind of felt, very, I don't know, isolated or unique initially, right? Or maybe felt like, they had done something wrong or something. So maybe it was a good platform for them, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Tell me.
So it's funny, I've answered that question or some form of that question a few times in the past couple of days as we roll out the film for the first time at festivals. And that's the thing most people are curious about. And I think that makes sense because it's a vulnerability and there's such a stigma attached, sadly. And so it's funny. I think at first they were they were very supportive right out of the gate, because I think that they thought it would be all of those things that you just listed, kind of a way to work through it, a way to feel less alone, reflect back. And now I'm talking about, 4 years ago, not 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I'm not sure, or sorry, it would be more like 13. I'm not sure, because I was a student and I was so young, that they really thought of it the same way they do now. Like anything would happen to it, anybody would really see it. I do think that the camera probably provided another tool in my toolkit to get them help and treatment, because I think that there's just even this underlying unconscious thing that happens when there's a camera pointed at you. I think you become more self-aware, even if you are in the throes of substance use disorder. I think it just adds another dynamic. It's almost like bringing another person in. So I think it did help. I mean, I'd like to think it helped in that way. But then more recently, I think it was different for every person. So for instance, my sister, because she was seeing more roadblocks every day in her sobriety, I was following her a lot more with the camera. And I think, it got in the way a little bit of our sisterhood and our relationship sometimes. And I hadn't expected that. And I think, I can't speak for her, but I think probably there may have been times where she needed me more as a sister than she needed me as a filmmaker. So it was touch and go, and it was different every day. And I think watching my mom, who's done festivals so far with me, now she's getting some of what you just spoke to, which is this feeling of not being alone and of being able to offer people a window into what this looks like when it is your mother, when it is a family member, because that's kind of what the film does. It forces you to see them as your own family member, because it forces you to watch, home movies of her whole life. So you see the whole person, not just her in the throes of substance use. But the audience reception so far has just been people so effusive about feeling less alone, that I think now she's starting to see some of that. Whereas before, it's just very unnerving. You don't know. I had a feeling of how it was going to be received, because I've been talking to people about this issue, but it's totally different for them. I am not exposing myself like they are, right. That's the bravery. So I'm sure that comes with a whole mountain of hesitancies and, uncertainties and insecurities, sadly. But I think that what they're being met with now, I hope is the payoff for what they were willing to share with the world.
Well, I'm so glad that you've had a chance to speak to, audiences since it's been, kind of starting to get out there. And so, I would think that they would tell you that this is what makes this film different from a lot of other, whether it's a CNN special or whatever that you're going to watch, is that it is kind of a snapshot, and it is rather sterile, right? Because we don't know, the director or the narrator does not have any personal relationship with whomever it is they're interviewing, etc. But this is very different. So, it is definitely worth your time, you guys, because if you've already seen, a lot of footage around this topic, which there has been, it's not really from this perspective, which really gives you an opportunity to have more empathy and really just see how easy it could be to fall into something like this, especially when there is not the right kind of, I guess, what would we say, legal or medical parameters around it. I mean, Mackenzie is still actually being, all the trial, et cetera, is not finished yet, or whatever it is that they're being brought up on, right? Mackenzie, yes. You guys probably know, Google if you don't, legendary kind of consulting firm had, consulted, I guess, the pharmaceutical companies around this to be able to position it in a way which then made incidences like your sister and your mother's something that happened at crisis level.
And a lot of some of the lawsuits that have been won in Oklahoma, that's the one in the film against Johnson and Johnson for their tactics, for their sales tactics, that was just overturned by the Supreme Court in that state. So yeah, it's I don't want to diminish the legal wins that have come about in recent months, or the settlements, because it's something and it's very necessary, but it's nothing compared to what is needed. And in terms of the policy and practice changes that are needed right now, Yeah, we're just not there. We're just not there.
Just amazing. What were some of maybe the hardest parts of, bringing this film to life? Because I think you had a very interesting journey with this, in that, as you said, you started at a certain point and then kind of put it away and then came back to it, not because of funding or anything, but just because it was not really the time for it. And then it became something bigger and you came back to it. At that point, you need to add more research, et cetera. Do you think that it was harder or easier for you to do that later on because you had so much knowledge, or was knowledge, as they say sometimes, like, a deterrent or whatever, or something that makes something more challenging because you aren't going into it like completely fresh and learning or whatever? You already had for I don't know, either good or bad, like kind of levels of bias around, your topic, because you had, 13 years previous, or 11 years, I guess, when you came back to it, 10 or 11 years, of experience that had been like kind of in a little capsule. So what was that like?
I mean, that's a great question. And I could go on and on with an answer for that, for so many different aspects of it, emotionally, and then, experience wise. But one thing you spoke to that was really interesting is that, when I did come back to it, I had read in those 10 years, I've read, I don't want to say every, but probably 90% of articles on it, books on it. So I was in a place where I couldn't really see the forest for the trees on this issue. I didn't understand where most people were starting from. So there was a full cut that was, I would say, just too in the weeds. It was just speaking to almost the experts on this issue, or at least people like me who lived it 10 years ago and then have read everything on it, which is very rare. And so I really had to pull back and try to rewind and bring myself back to that place where I was 10 years ago, and that level of knowledge about the opioid epidemic and about the misinformation that was sown. I just figured everybody knows this now, but that's not true. They know the name Purdue and they know the name Sackler and they know there was wrongdoing, but a lot of people don't understand how it's still perpetuated today, how it's still contributing to the epidemic they're seeing, of the face of which is now heroin and illicit fentanyl. And I mean, for the most part. So I really had to go back and try to remember what it was like. And for that, I had a wonderful team around me to constantly be bringing me back to that place of where most people, meeting the general public, where they were at. And then I would just say, emotionally, what was harder than I realized it would be, I felt like I had really come to grips with this time in my life and what had happened. And I felt so lucky and privileged to have gotten out on the other side. Even though it's a daily battle for them, I don't want to diminish that. And for us as a family, but I didn't realize how hard it would be emotionally to put myself back in that place where I was truly terrified for their lives every second of every day. And I had to get myself back there in order to convey it in a real, honest way that would make people who have lived it feel like it does justice to that experience, which is such a singular thing to go through. And I didn't realize how far away I'd tucked that feeling until I had to dig it back up. And I had to do it in the middle of COVID, which, again, like, I'm so lucky to do what I do. I hate to, like, it wasn't a torture session, but in those ways, it was very unexpected that I had to go back to that place. But for me, it was helpful because then in shaping the impact campaign and in shaping the rollout and in shaping the conversation around it, I remembered how scary it is and what I needed. And maybe I could offer that then to other people who are in it now, or who did lose a loved one.
That's such a great way to look at it. That, you're able to just kind of use your experience for support of others. But of course, when you came to this at that year, you also had grown as a filmmaker too. So can you speak a little bit about, what had happened in your career and maybe what you pulled upon most to be able to kind of bring this, kind of refine it and then, bring it bring it to fruition, because you've done so many things. I mean, and, you know, for Netflix, for HBO, etc. So, you know, a lot has happened with, you know, your family, but also you as a professional, which in that case, I'm sure would have supported your efforts.
Yeah, I was very frustrated with my 20-year-old self at times for not knowing how to do proper audio recording or not knowing how to work my handheld Super 8 camera even. And one of my producers, Marilyn Ness, from the very beginning, she said, who has now done such beautiful artistic work in stuff like Dick Johnson Is Dead and Camera Person. And from the beginning, she said, embrace the student film, embrace the nitty gritty, you know, amateur pieces of it. Just if you embrace it, people will feel the 20-year-old behind the camera and your fear. Don't try to make it what you would make it now, because you didn't make it now. So it took me a while to stop trying to shine it up and make it look like I wish it looked now.
Right.
Because I couldn't recapture that moment. I couldn't go back to that time and place. So instead, and there was a time where I thought maybe it would be better as a short because it was limited material. But instead I just tried cutting a scene of my sister describing what it feels like to be on opioids for the first time, when it's not even described so much as a high, but just the sense of well-being and happiness and wholeness. And I've heard it described so many times. And so I just cut kind of this experiential scene where, you know, I used other Super 8, color Super 8, all kinds of archival and abstract imagery. And I had actually read an article in the New York Times that talks about it. It kind of did this 3D experience of going through opioid usage. And it just like lit up some things in my brain. And that's funny. I just used the same wording my sister uses to describe opioids. But we realized, okay, if we can't watch them go through it, let's go inside their heads and go through it with them. So in those scenes where I maybe don't have that much coverage, luckily I have some, you know, mini DV footage and VHS footage and pictures. And I could combine that with this more experiential approach that kind of wraps you into that moment with them. So you slip into their mind and their experience, which I think again, it ended up being a blessing, because this thing that I felt like really limited me, not having coverage of them in those, you know, 4K mic'd up in those moments, it ended up actually lending this intimacy where you're forced to be with them instead of just watch them as a spectacle, which is often how we watch substance use, especially in even on a community scale. You know, we see it from afar, and so we were like, well, let's bring them in there. And I think that's why people so far at least are walking away with a different singular experience than they've had before, which is
there is really something different about that type of video, isn't it? I mean, it's even like I think has been experienced in, say, like the beauty community, where, like, you know, the girls who do all the YouTube, like, this is how you should do like your eye makeup and blah, blah. And, you know, L'Oreal will try it and it just comes off, it's too beautiful. It's too polished, too perfect. It is, you know, state of the art, which it should be because it's from L'Oreal, but that's not what really brings you in. It's the girl sitting in her bedroom who's keeping it beyond real. Who you're like, this girl knows eyelashes. Like, you know what I mean? And you love that. And so it's the same thing when you watch, you know, that footage that you did earlier. It's like you're doing it not from a technical point of view, but from just wanting to tell the story. And without all of the lighting and everything, it makes it more accessible, you know, to a certain extent. So tell us what some of the audience reaction, you know, has been as you've had this out and about.
Yeah, I mean, it might not be the best thing to say promo wise, but just to prepare people, just a lot of tears, to be honest. People have told me they've cried from the first scene. There's also been a lot of joy, though. I have to say there is a lot of joy in the film for those who haven't seen it. There's all of those things I'd like to think fused into one. So it's certainly not just this treacherous you know, hour and a half at all, but I've been met with, I'm almost stunned by the question even, because just, I can't even put into words how heartfelt the reactions have been and how grateful people seem to have something reflected back to them that actually feels like their experience of it, either as a parent or a sibling or a child. because I think they've seen their family members or their friends or colleagues, loved ones, everybody reflected in this way that I don't want to diminish how the media has covered it up to this point. It's important. I'm grateful for every single piece that comes out about it. But I think, like you said, and I didn't even realize till I started making it, how much that intimate portrait had been missing, that piece that people can connect to. And that's what I keep being met with. And then just people's stories of loss is, I've realized that this issue has touched every single person in some way. And if not opioids, it's substance use of another kind. And it seems very pervasive in society, of course, because we all have our coping mechanisms, and maybe they're more dangerous or risky than others, but I think everybody can relate to that. And so, yeah, it's really just been exactly what you said, just this people being surprised at the way in which the issue is covered. I think they kind of know what they're getting into when they go see the film. And then it's just a totally different experience. I mean, I think the 20% is home movies. So in that way, it does feel like your family member. And that's been such a gift to know that I could, my team, this film, my family could offer any piece of that, even for just a moment, because I know how bad I needed it at 19 and 20. I know how bad we all as a family needed that. And it's such a lonely, isolating disease and experience. I think the loneliness and the stigma is just as deadly at times as any other part of it. So, I mean, that alone, I've had lifelong friends tell me for the first time that their spouse, their parents, their sibling has a problem that they've never talked about, and now they're willing to talk about it. I mean, I couldn't ask for anything more than that.
Interesting. So Jamie, you are like pretty young, like to be so accomplished. Like, I can't wait to see what happens, in the next decade of your life. How do you think that you've managed to kind of do so much and achieve so much, like, in a pretty short span of time, and not like sitting right in, LA doing like everything, and like your parents were, well-known directors or somebody in the business, right? And what tips might you have for those who are like trying to do the same? Because obviously it comes down to talent, but it's always talent plus a lot of things that we can't really describe, right? So, I mean, just if you had to maybe pick a couple of things, was it, certain relationships that you either went after, or you put yourself in certain places, or what were kind of your thoughts as you started out after you put away the camera from like, phase one of this project, and you were like, okay, now I need to go and do everything else after film school?
Yeah. I mean, on the downside is I probably became a little bit of a workaholic after that. I think I fell in love with the camera and I used it a little bit as my own hiding place and coping mechanism. So I probably worked longer hours than I should have. I could have taken better care of myself. So the first thing I usually try to tell younger people is like, it's okay to take a little longer. I could burn out early. You never know, so it's okay to take care of yourself and go slower. I also I really tried to, I mean, I think I had to the little that I did take care of myself was reflected in the relationships that I was drawn to, and that you always I have a few like 5 or 10 moments, forks in the road, where I could have went this way, I could have went this way, or maybe a few other ways. And I think the part of myself that was taking care of myself went in the direction of the people that really cared for me and supported me. I would say I was hired as an assistant editor on a really top tier doc film E-team. And I just clicked with the people, and I could tell that they were there to support me. And I ended up being brought up to associate editor on that film. And those same people I'm still working with, and they're still, Marilyn Ness is one of the producers on this film. So like, find your people and walk away from the ones that aren't supporting you and holding you there. I also think, I've been talking about Carla Gutierrez and the BIPOC editors database, because they're trying to that, I mean, just combat the inequality in this industry. And one of the things they're trying to do is start this associate editor program where people get the chance to do what I did, which you don't often get, which is be brought up from assistant to associate editor. So you are cutting scenes, you have things to show, because that can just launch you straight into a whole nother strata if you have work to show. The only other thing I would say too is I worked for a lot of nonprofits, and they gave me ACLU and Human Rights Watch,
cool.
and they gave me the chance to cut a lot of short films. So I had a lot of cutting to show directors and producers, and that helped hugely because I could show them 20 to 30 short films that I'd cut. So I'd say also just don't be afraid of hard work. Like if you're making a binder, if you're organizing footage, do it to the best of your ability, and people will notice, and then it will pay off.
Love that idea. And I love that idea of working with nonprofits who might give you more opportunity to do things. And you're also doing something, that supports them at the same time. Very, very cool tip.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, they gave me great opportunity, but it's often they're certainly concerned with the quality, but they're also mostly concerned with getting the message out in a timely way.
Right.
So
I mean, it's just going to be a different set of priorities than trying to get to do something on HBO or whatever. Do you know what I mean? It's just
exercising a different muscle. Yeah. So I'd say definitely keep exercising your creative, more in-depth muscle at the same time if you do fall into the short-term work. But it's a great opportunity to get some work. Yeah.
So great. So anything else you might want to add, Jamie, either in terms of, your career, any tips, or, just this film, anything overall?
Well, I'm trying to think. I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk with you and to promote the film and talk about the film. This is just as gratifying as putting it out there. But I would just say, there's a lot of, I feel like people are walking away from the film, and this is another benefit I didn't anticipate, but with a lot of useful information that they didn't have before, even though it's not delivered in an informational way, it's really delivered in an anecdotal way, but it seems like it's actually helping people in their everyday life, whether their son has just been prescribed Vicodin for a wisdom tooth extraction. It's helpful to kind of know this stuff as you're navigating your own healthcare. So that makes it sound a little dry, but it's not. But it's been a huge benefit because, this side of the issue isn't talked about as much as what we're seeing now, because it's just gotten so bad. So many people have turned to heroin and illicit drugs, but the prescribing part, like my producer describes as, people are still getting on the on-ramp. And that's the part that really scares me.
Which I'm just was surprised to know that after everything that's going on, that you can't believe that there's still a yes around any of this stuff. And then I don't know, for me, I forget what I was watching before, like something maybe a year ago, or I don't know, like maybe like a Dateline thing or something like that. I didn't know that if you stopped like cold turkey, that you could just like die. And neither did a lot of the people who were, addicted to this early on. And it seems like it's a good thing. Like, this isn't good for your body, so you just want to stop. But then that's sometimes the worst thing that you could do, but there was no education around that, right? So like you said, it's good to just hear every single thing, even if it's not for yourself or somebody who you might know or a friend of a friend.
And a lot of doctors are still very misinformed, and it's not their fault. Their educations were funded by big pharma. So, you do really have to take your healthcare into your own hands. I don't want to tell people don't trust your doctor. That's the last narrative I want to add to at this point in particular, with the vaccine hesitancy and all the misinformation around that. But it is important when it comes to opioids specifically, and maybe some other things that I can't speak to.
Well, I mean, just so many things in general. Because I mean, didn't like right when Pfizer was at the height of, well, I don't even know if they've reached the height of pushing the vaccine, like the same day that something got approved was when they also had to pull Chantix from the shelves because the patch that you were using to not get cancer from smoking gave you cancer. Right. So these are things where you're like, oh, I'd love to know that in advance if I was like using Chantix. And you think, well, wait, didn't you guys study this, or didn't the FDA study this? How does that come up later on? You just don't know. So, I mean, I agree with you. It's not about pointing fingers, but it is important. And I think we're taught this particularly as, women and with our own set of, organs, to know what questions to ask, and what lab are you using, what kind. I don't know, that's just something that we are taught, and I think everybody should think about that even more, no matter what gender and no matter what issue. Ask questions, because doctors sometimes have like this godlike quality, or we're taught that, but they're
And they
still
often
human.
will say they hate when you Google things. Like the second you say to your doctor, "Oh, I Googled," they're
And
like,
you know what? Then that might not be the doctor to have, because I want to have a conversation.
Google away.
Like we're gonna have to have a discussion, and what are all the options and all that.
That's what I would encourage, because there's a lot of doctors who will try to take patients off cold turkey. They're learning, but I've had people ask me, well-educated, whatever, respected, successful people ask me, well, is Percocet an opioid? Is Vicodin an opioid? Yes. And there are a lot of names and a lot of brands out there, and your doctor won't necessarily tell you. We're trying to help work on laws around those things. And like we said, changing medical practice, but it's a work in progress. A lot of people think the prescription part of this epidemic is so far in the past that of course you can trust your doctor now and whatever they say or whatever they know. It's not a trust issue. It's an information education issue for sure.
Crazy. Jamie, how can people find you online in the film? Now is the time to promo.
I don't have all my handles ready. I should have them ready. You can Google Anonymous Sister. There's a website, anonymoussister.com. You can find all our social media handles on there. And we're just now launching we're starting a soft launch now, but a bigger launch of our impact campaign starting next year. Along with distribution, hopefully, and continuing with film festivals. So yeah, please keep an eye out. All our screenings will be on there on our website. We're also on social media, but you can find our exact handles on there, and mine as well.
That's great. Jamie, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time, and continued success with with this film and everything else that you do. And you guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope that this has been really interesting and informative for you, and do keep up on this should you be so interested, because it's really, really key. So many different key issues, I think, just being expanded upon during DOC NYC, and that's just what makes this festival really so special. We love all our festivals. This one has some really, really interesting topics going on. So thank you so much for watching. As always, this has been the Inside series right here at film.io, and I am Lauren Delisa Coleman.